Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our second personal development webinar. My name is Benji. I'm joined by Mark. Thank you all for coming. These sessions we do after hours, so it's not interrupting with your workday, and we're really focused in these talks a little bit more on organizing your personal life, your habits, your systems for success outside of business, because at the end of the day, they're all one thing. And so today's session is about how to build your own personal scorecard. You will have heard me say this before. We'll certainly bring it up again today, this idea of what gets measured gets managed. And over the next hour or so, Mark is going to teach us a framework for how to begin measuring your own success in a much more concrete and specific way to know if you're ahead or behind. We say this all the time at LeanScaper, people play better when you keep score. And if you're keeping score on yourself, you're going to play better too. So we'll talk about how to go from really vague goals to very specific SMART goals. Mark, are you ready on your end?
All set? Yep.
Let's do it.
All right. So we'll jump right in, and there will be a couple breaks as we kind of go through this for you to kind of do a little bit of hands-on work. So hopefully you've got a notepad and some paper or a device if you use a device. What I wanted to talk about today is really building a scorecard around SMART goals. In the last session, we really talked a lot specifically about creating a vision and a 10-year vision for your life. And I talked a lot about when you begin with the end in mind and when you can see exactly what it is that you want in life over the next 10 years, it kind of gives you this gift of knowing what you need to do in order for that to become your new reality. And so what we're kind of doing is beginning with the end in mind and saying, here's what I want my life to look like in 10 years. And now what we're going to try to do is think about what goals could we set this year or this month or this quarter that would actually get us a step closer to that vision. And so, generally speaking, when you start to take a goal setting approach to life, things start to change pretty quickly. Most people have set some New Year's goals. I mean, I think just about everybody has said that they're going to do something in the coming year and probably not really achieved it. I think we've all shared that experience once or twice. But the reality is that generally is a result of the way that we set goals. And the fact that although we set goals, we don't really have a way to pay attention to whether or not we're actually doing the things that we need to do in order for those goals to become a reality. As we think about building a scorecard so that you can actually keep track of whether or not these things are happening on a weekly, monthly, and quarterly basis, it really becomes obvious that we have to create better goals to begin with, because we can't really create a scorecard if our goals are too vague. And I think this is why most goals don't really always go terribly well. Personal goals often, we're holding ourselves accountable. And if they're vague to begin with, then it's pretty easy to kind of fall off course. We'll start with a couple of examples here, vague goals. Now, obviously, these are very vague, right? If my goals were, I'm going to eat healthier this year, or I'm going to go to the gym this year, or I'm going to save more money, or I'm going to buy a house, or maybe it's something more specific to work, like I'm going to learn how to operate a skid steer, or I'm going to spend more time with my kids or with my spouse. Now, these type of goals are great. We all have these goals, though. Every human has, some general goals that look like this. And again, these aren't really goals. They're more like thoughts. I think at this point, it's just, this is what I want to do. And I think a lot of people go through life knowing things like this, but they don't really have a smart way of creating an actionable approach to these things becoming a reality. So I think that's really ultimately the biggest difference between people that are feeling a little less fulfilled or a little less clear on purpose and people who are. Because once you've got that vision for your life, I think where you build momentum is knowing that you're actually driving incremental improvement. I've kind of searched high and low for happiness. I think most humans do throughout life. And I'll tell you, the one thing I've really noticed is in the search for happiness, I think oftentimes we create a vision or we create a plan or we create a goal, but it doesn't really end up helping or making things feel better. So I think sometimes people give up altogether. Now, vague goals make it much easier to give up. Smart goals, on the other hand, where you get specific, they give you this gift of being able to actually see and feel and understand incremental improvement. Now, I think incremental improvement is actually the secret to finding fulfillment. Whether you follow the Bible or you follow Tony Robbins or the Dalai Lama, just about anything you read will always point to incremental improvement, creating momentum and therefore creating happiness or fulfillment in life. And so when we can see that we can actually track some incremental improvement and see that we're getting a little closer to the goal, we tend to give ourselves this gift, and it's dopamine and a few other good chemicals that our brains produce when we actually see that we're hitting the plan or that we're achieving what we set out to achieve. Our brains and our bodies give us this little dose of dopamine and a few other good chemicals that our brains present when we can actually see success. And so this is just, we're kind of scientifically hacking our brains when we create something to measure and we see that we're winning. No different than if you step onto the soccer field or the hockey game or the football field and there's a scoreboard. Everybody kind of picks up the pace and gets a little more interested when they can keep score. And so the key, I think, at least in my experience and everything I've read and every mentor I've ever had on this topic, being able to actually measure on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, or annual basis makes a huge difference. And so when you think about eating healthy, rather than just simply saying, I'm going to eat healthy, why not get really specific and say, I'm going to eat 1,800 calories per day. 30% of that will be from protein, 30% from carbs, 30% from fat. And yes, my math is not my best subject, but I realize there's 10% missing there. The other plus or minus is going to come from one of the three. And so, again, not setting out to find perfection, just simply setting out with a plan. And so once I have those metrics, then I can forecast whether or not I'm going to lose weight if I'm trying to lose weight, or gain muscle if I'm trying to gain muscle, whatever it happens to be. But I know that I've put together a goal that is measurable, that I can track. And at the end of the month, I can add everything up and see whether or not I'm a step closer to the goal. And eating healthy, it would be pretty obvious I'd be there if I just did this every day of the month. Going to the gym, same idea. Saying how many times, how long, what I'm going to do. These things are going to be a lot more clear and easier for me to follow up on and execute. And again, all of these things end up going into your calendar. And when you take these SMART goals and you apply them to a calendar with recurring block time for each of these things, and you make some adjustments each week or maybe even each month, depending on seasonality and things that are happening in life. But what we're really trying to do is create structure, but also create something that we can score ourselves to. So when I've got 1,800 calories a day and 4 workouts, I know whether or not I'm actually doing the things that I set out to do. Saving more money is a great example. A lot of times people want to save more money, but somehow end up going further into debt. Ultimately, I think it's really important to first off set a dollar amount and set a due date, and maybe even a quick breakdown when you're building goals out like this. Now, we're going to build on these in a few minutes, but ultimately, getting specific about how much, by when, and maybe even some incremental breakdown of what I'll need to do each month. Buying a house, setting a realistic date, like when do I want to buy a house? And now knowing that I want to buy this house by June of 27, I know what I need for a down payment. I'm looking to buy a $300,000 house. Maybe the down payment is $30,000 or $60,000. What I want to do is, beginning with that end date in mind, now what I get to do is create supporting initiatives to make this happen. I couldn't do that if I didn't have a specific date and a specific budget in mind. And so, again, when we're creating these goals, what we're trying to do is just get really smart about the way we build the goals, which I'll talk more about this in a minute, but ultimately SMART goals are specific, measurable, they're achievable. We're not setting ourselves up to fail. And they're relevant, obviously, to the goal and to the vision that we've set out in life to achieve. And then they're time bound. Ultimately, the SMART goals are like a foundation for creating good initiatives that actually drive the results that we're looking for. So the SMART goals themselves don't have to answer every question. The SMART goals just need to identify what we're trying to achieve and when we're trying to achieve these things, and what that due date or target timeline is. What I want everybody to work on here off the start is I want to give you 10 minutes to do this. What I want you to work on in these 10 minutes is really take the time to mindfully think about at least one goal. You could have two or three if you're really moving quickly, but at least one for each of these categories. I think generally the goals come to mind fairly quickly for most people, but I want to make sure that when you create these goals that they're SMART goals, which again, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals. So for health and wellness, state 1 or 2 or 3. Health and wellness, I like to think of that as both physical and mental health. And then on work and skills, this could be something that's going to improve your career or the skill set, make you more valuable in your job or in your business. Family, this is usually putting more time in with your spouse, with your kids, with your parents, siblings, whatever it might be. But being specific about that, I think not just simply saying spending more time, but like spending more time with intention. It could be helping your aging parents. That's certainly a point I'm at in life. It could be helping your children with homework more often, or helping your children learn a new sport or a new craft or hobby. But be specific when you come up with these. And then friends and community, this could be, joining a church. It could be spending more time with friends, hosting your friends for one evening a month to have a get together at your place on Saturday night, whatever it happens to be. Personal growth could be reading one book a month that really helps you expand your mind and actually focus on being the best version of yourself as a human. Could be personal growth, could be spending time with different circle of people, finding some new friends if you're feeling like you're at that point where you need to find some new friends. And so I'll give you guys 10 minutes. Take your time on this. Use this hour that we're spending here together to set some intention and really just give yourself the break of really focusing on this for 10 minutes. If you don't get every goal completely finished, you can come back to this and finish it, but give it a good start here while we've got these 10 minutes. As we think about actually executing on these plans, I think one of the key things that often when we're thinking about personal goals, we don't give ourselves the grace of actually building incremental plans or plans that we can kind of look at and break down into a way of really executing. So I just thought I'd choose a really simple one in terms of example, not so simple in terms of actually executing. If I wanted to save $10,000 in 12 months, many of us set out with a plan like this, and that could be our New Year's resolution, or it could just be a plan we're saving for a house or a boat or a cottage or a trip or whatever it happens to be. But we don't really think about how we're going to actually make that happen. So, time passes and a year goes by and we look back and we may not have saved 10,000. In fact, we may have even went into some debt. But the reality is like the easiest way to make this happen is really just breaking it down into quarters. I always really like splitting things down into quarters because there's 4 quarters in a year and there's 12 weeks in a quarter. Kind of gives me this like vision of a cycle. And I look at each of those as a cycle in which I get an opportunity to win. And I can win every day, every week, every month, and every quarter. And again, that's just building momentum. I was 335 pounds, and I decided that in 1 year I would get to 195 pounds, so 140 pounds. I did that exactly on time. So in the first 8 months, I said I'd lose 100 pounds. And I went to the doctor and I said to the doctor, "Hey, listen, I really want to lose this weight. You've been giving me my health reports, telling me I'm going to be dead by the time I'm 60. I want to make this happen." And so he said, "Well, I don't think you can lose that much weight in a year. I think it's going to probably take you 2 years." And so I didn't like that answer. So I kind of went back to the drawing board and thought about it a little bit more. And I ended up kind of just mathematically reverse engineering this weight loss. So, but what I did was I said, well, in order for this to happen, I figured out what my calorie deficit needed to be to lose a pound. And that was 4,400 calories. And so I knew what my calorie deficit needed to be each day, each week, each month, and for the year in order to lose the weight. And so from there, it was pretty easy. I just had to figure out how many hours per day of exercise I needed and what type of exercise. And then, I had to figure out what to eat and all these types of things. And so went to another doctor, they said, "No, can't do it, that you'll lose all your hair." And, they had all kinds of stories. And I just kept doing more research every time they would say that couldn't be done. And in the end, I ended up with maybe 4 or 5 different doctors doing different things. I went to one doctor and had my stomach surgically removed, so I can only eat 1 cup of food for the rest of my life. So that was like a no-brainer to me. I thought, well, that'll make it easy to eat 900 calories a day. If I can only eat a cup at a time for the rest of my life, I'll probably never gain weight again. And then I figured out, like, in order to burn that much fat, I'd have to walk 2 to 3 hours a day. So I scheduled that into my calendar. I knew that I'd have to build a lot of muscle in order to kind of take up some of the space that I'd probably have from having some extra skin. So I really went to work on strength training, and that took another hour and a half a day. And so I ended up scheduling 5 days a week at first. And then I quickly realized, I think I need to do this 7 days a week. So I actually slowed down the hours per day and extended it over 7 days. And I made some tweaks along the way. But on July 1st, I was supposed to be down 100 pounds. And on June 30th, I was down 100 pounds. It literally was timed to the day. But again, just by being mathematical and breaking it down into days and weeks and months and really knowing what had to be true each day, each week, each month made that a lot easier for me. I've used this goal setting system for everything in life. My relationships with my kids, with my parents, with Liz, building and selling businesses, building great people within my businesses, changing my perspective on life and on spirituality, connecting more with friends and community, and, naturally just growing as a person in many, many ways. And of course, just being a continuous learner and picking up new skills. And, as you go through life, whatever you focus on and wherever you spend your time kind of dictates your reality. And I think when you can break it down like this and say, well, here's where I'm going in 12 months, here's what has to be true in a quarter, here's what has to be true each week and each day, then you kind of give yourself this magical gift of knowing where to spend your time. And when you actually take the time and block it out into your calendar, then I think, and only then, do you end up really making it automated. In other words, you've set the goal, you've made a SMART goal, but you've kind of automated it in the sense that provided you actually follow your calendar each day and you do the thing that you say you're going to do with the intensity and the focus that it takes to make that happen, then it really does truly become a reality. And so this little workflow on the bottom is very simple, right? At the end of the day, we take our life vision. And when I look at my 10-year vision, like right now I'm 50, my 10-year vision is to be the fittest 60-year-old that I could possibly be. And so this, my annual goals for fitness, just staying on fitness, then get broken down into quarterly and monthly, and they get down into weekly and daily. And when I know where I'm going to spend that time, I just have to put it in my calendar as a recurring meeting. And that could be, if I don't have the time at 9 a.m., then I'm going to do it at 5 a.m. If I don't have it at 5 a.m., I'm going to do it at 6 p.m. But I'm going to find a time in my calendar and make it recurring. And then I'm going to try to avoid overbooking on that time. Now, things happen. There's travel days or there's family events and whatever, but staying with that calendar 80-90% of the time is going to likely get you a hell of a lot closer to that goal than not having it in the calendar at all. And so the calendar becomes this unbelievable delivery mechanism. And when you start to look at the concept of really eliminating and automating and delegating as much as possible in life to free up time, I think where you've really kind of allocated time for your goals is, what you do with that extra time. We'll jump to the next page. So again, where you spend your time really does dictate your future. I think the biggest difference between people who spend their time really intentionally and everybody else is just whether or not they have goals. And so if we kind of look at this little hierarchy of the average person's week, I mean, everybody's a little different. You're definitely going to update this for yourself, but work, plus or minus 50 hours by the time you commute and put your hours in. Hopefully you're not working too much more than that. Sleep, 56 hours, pretty healthy sleep week. Most of your learning, most of your recovery, and most of your clarity comes from sleeping. All day long, you're learning. And you might think you're actually learning through the day, but you actually do most of your learning in the second half of your sleep pattern. These are just scientific facts. On the second half of your sleep, if you're getting good sleep, your subconscious consumes everything you learned and experienced that day. And you log those patterns in your subconscious mind to be tapped into as needed in the future. So the sleep component is a major part of continuous improvement as a human. And so those 56 hours shouldn't really be something we mess with, right? Our bodies need it, our minds need it. Working in landscape, whether you're in the field, in the office, or a bit of both, you are very active. So you need that time to rest the brain and the body. Personal, 62 hours. I think most people say they don't have any time, and I've certainly heard myself saying this before, particularly when I was overweight and going through marital problems and finding myself too busy running too many businesses, just not putting time into the right people or the right places in life. I think everybody has came up with this excuse at some point in life to say, there's not enough time. Well, the difference between people that find fulfillment and happiness in life and everybody else is really they decide where they spend their time with a lot more focus. And their life vision and their goals dictate where they spend their time. Because if we create a vision for our life and we set some goals to help make that become our new reality, well, all we really need to do in order for that to become our reality is actually put the time in with that focus. And so when you think about breaking those 62 hours down, I think we have to say, well, we've got 16 hours per day on the weekends that are more or less open. And maybe you work on the weekends. I'm just kind of doing this as an example. And then Monday to Friday, we've got 5 hours a day. And I think we all know after working a full day, you don't have the mental or physical motivation sometimes to go and do the hard thing. The fitness or the personal growth or spending time with intention on relationships. But I think when we calendar this and we start to get into a rhythm, we build a lot more momentum. And this is something that I think a lot of people struggle with, is actually putting a calendar together from the time they wake up to the time they go to bed, 7 days a week. Now, it sounds boring. But the reality is when you're actually designing the life of your dreams and then you're calendaring it out, like what you're putting in the calendar is the life that you actually want for yourself. And yeah, while you're at work, those 50 hours, you should be focused on doing your absolute best work. Because, there's one thing that my father taught me when I was very young. My father had a grade 6 education and did not come from much, didn't even have parents. He was an orphan. The one thing that my father taught me that I often repeat is when you always show up and you do more than you're paid for, your life will always get better. Not because the owner of the company is going to notice immediately, but because somebody will notice immediately. And when somebody notices that you do more than you're paid for and that you do a better job, eventually that comes back to you. You will always end up being recognized if you show up with that kind of intention every day. And if you're working in a company where you can never get noticed, then you just go move to a new company. But whatever you do is you keep showing up and you do more than you're paid for every day. And so if you're doing that at work, and if you're sleeping with intention and with your personal hours, you're spending your time actually serving the goals that you've set out and you've architected this in your calendar, then you get to live the life of your dreams. And I think a key tool that I certainly discovered a few years back when I went through that weight loss journey that I was talking about was this concept of time stacking. I think I always had this excuse that I was too busy, and I was too busy for everything that I had to do. I was too busy to possibly be doing fitness and be working on myself spiritually and growing as an individual and be working on relationships and be working on a business. The list seemed too long. But what I really started to realize is when I started to really stack my time, things changed very quickly. When I put fitness in my calendar for 3 hours, 4 hours, at one point, even 5 hours a day, what I decided to do was stack that time. And so I was stacking that time by doing bike rides with my kids, doing really long 2 to 3 hour walks daily with Liz. Liz was often in the gym with me doing the workouts. We were going to yoga together. We were cooking together. And so I was stacking a lot of my time on different goals with my time in my relationship. And then also sometimes when I was working out, or most of the time when I was working out, I would also throw in my earbuds, and rather than just listen to music, I would listen to books. And sometimes those books were me learning new business skills. You don't go from being a grade 12 graduate like me to owning an AI software company without constantly reading about the thing that you need to learn about in order for that vision to become a reality. And so I do a lot of time stacking around reading. And so I'll be reading books to grow myself at work and also things to grow myself personally. Or it might just be reading the Bible. But that personal growth time can definitely easily be stacked with fitness and, again, like the relationship as well. A lot of times my personal growth, I'll stack with time spent with my kids and Liz because we'll work on the same exercises, setting goals and vision and learning or taking online courses or watching YouTube videos to learn how to do something new. But ultimately, I think it's really important to use this time stacking to avoid coming up with excuses to say that you just don't have any time. And then on the weekend, like what can you really do with 16 hours a day on the weekends? I think most of us waste our weekends. I think it's really important to prioritize relationships and family and personal growth, and also to honor God and your spirituality. The weekends are meant to recover. There's no doubt about it. But there is a lot of opportunity on the weekends. And I always kind of say, like, there's seasons to life. And if you're in your 20s and you're trying to save for your first house, like, you can screw around all weekend and go play golf, or you can put in some extra hours either at work getting paid or growing your business. Maybe you've got a side hustle, or going in on the weekend and learning things on your own time at work, like how to run a skid steer or how to use a laser level or read drawings or use LMN or something like that. But generally speaking, there's a lot of extra time on the weekends that could be put into areas of life that I think, create return on time invested. By spending 3 or 4 hours every weekend growing your skill set at work, you're going to be worth a lot more money a year from now. And so it may seem like you're not getting paid when you go to work for 4 hours every Saturday for 3 months learning how to run a skid steer. But if you did that and you really think about it, if you put 60 hours into learning how to run a skid steer, yes, maybe you didn't get paid the $2,000 in wages, but your wage increase next year might be $10,000 or maybe even more. Who knows, if you're really learning all these skills. And so it's really important as individuals to always look at where you're spending your time, having return on time invested. And this is why it's so important to be learning and growing as a person, but also becoming a continuous learner in your profession. We'll jump to the next page. The delivery here, where we're going to end off this week is on supporting initiatives. Now, we set out to drive some improvement in these 5 areas: health and wellness, work and skills, family, friends and community, and personal growth. And you may mix a few others in there, and that's fine. But ultimately, we've got some specific goals here, very specific. And now what we need to do in order to enable ourselves is to come up with some strategies or some initiatives that actually make this happen. The supporting initiatives on the health and wellness, I know I want to eat 1,800 calories a day and I want to hit the gym 4 times a week, and maybe I want to walk or bike ride or something. But the supporting initiatives are use the MyFitnessPal app to calculate my calories and to calculate my macros. And I got to join a gym. And maybe I'd even add in calendar this into my calendar. I want to put these block times in my calendar. Now, that would be a really powerful initiative because now I've automated the success in health and wellness. Work and skills, same thing. Operate the skid steer by December 1st. Read plans and set grades by June 1st. I'm going to go to the yard every Saturday morning for 3 hours, and I'm going to learn how to do this. I don't expect to be paid. I'm just going to go and do it. And by doing this, I'm going to be worth a lot more money. When I did my apprenticeship, I was 18, and it was a 5-year apprenticeship, and I got it finished in under 4 years. But I went to night school 4 nights a week. Plus Saturdays, I went to a welding school, in addition to working 40 to and even sometimes 60-hour weeks. And I did that at that age, and it created a huge impact on my work ethic and my skill set. And it became, just a way of living. But again, that was because I set really high bar for myself at a young age. And I think it's really important that everybody does some hard things at young age. It shouldn't be all entertainment in your 20s. I think that is a season where you should be learning to work hard. You should be learning to set goals, and you should be learning to stick to the plan. So at any age, it's never too late to start, but I definitely think that the initiatives that you set and the calendar are the delivery mechanism for all of these initiatives or all of these goals that we're talking about. More time with spouse and kids. We can cook together. We can walk and work out together. We can put time blocks in the calendar for entertainment together or spending time doing hobbies together. I can put a date night in my calendar for recurring date nights. All kinds of things like this that really change your life. And so as we wrap up, I just wanted to note a great book for everybody here. It's called The Mountain Is You. The author's name is Brianna Wiest. The book is an incredible book. I think everybody should read this book in life. It helps you really understand your habits. It helps you understand that the only thing in the way of what you want is yourself. And I think it helps you really kind of audit some of the limiting beliefs you might have and some of the things that you might be holding you back that you're not aware of. Oftentimes, we're kind of our own worst enemies, if you will. And the book kind of helps you see that pattern a little bit more clearly. And I think really helps you understand when you're hurting yourself. And I think it's a tremendously good book to read alongside what we're working on here this month. So I'd highly recommend you read that book and get focused on these actual goals make sure that they're measurable, because you can't possibly have a scorecard without SMART goals. They have to be SMART, they have to be measurable. And of course, we're going to get these supporting initiatives all clarified and into the calendar so that this actually happens.
Guys, this is another awesome hour. Thank you for the presence, the attention, the questions. Really appreciate you all being here on a weeknight evening. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Mark, for your time as well. We will see you at the next personal development webinar a month from now, and you'll be hearing about that from us in your inbox. So stay tuned for that. Cheers, guys. Take care.